we're back.
Yes.
And this time I want to talk about French cinema.
Yes.
Before the New Wave, which, one, I'm really passionate about right now, and have been kind of for a couple years, off and on. And two, I think it's sort of an untouched. People have written about these directors,
right, yes,
but people don't talk about it a lot because the New Wave kind of overshadows what they did.
Exactly.
And I don't think people understand that a lot of what the New Wave did was influenced by some of what these guys paved the way.
Right.
So, but I thought, I don't know what you kind of have planned based on this, but I have some directors that I kind of wanted to just touch on.
Sure, I'll let you lead and then I'll
Okay.
follow.
Well, I wanted to say, first of all, one of the most famous directors from this era is Jean Renoir.
Mm-hmm.
And surprisingly, with how much you and I talk about film, we don't really talk about Renoir that much.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I wanted to ask you, because you don't bring him up, is that because his films don't really resonate much with you? I mean, I think that Grand Illusion is a masterpiece.
I think so too.
And
yes.
Rules of the Game is a good movie. I don't know about a masterpiece. And I really like his version of The Lower Depths with Jean Gabin.
Right.
Gabin. And I was just wondering what your thoughts on Renoir were.
Oh no, I like his work. I'll tell you what. Really, I mean, you said don't mention him. Actually, I forget him because I confuse him with his father. Who was a great painter, right?
Right.
Like that.
Right.
And so I think of Renoir, and I always think of the painter and I
not
forget
the filmmaker. Okay. That makes sense.
And you said Grand Illusion is one of the masterpieces.
Right.
And it's just one of those films that, because of the time that passed, we forget about. I actually saw the film while I was at ASU. I hadn't seen it before. I'd heard about it, but I hadn't seen it before. And
while you were teaching?
Yes,
Okay.
right.
Yeah.
And I was like blown away by
Yeah.
it. And I was like, wow, this is... But if you hadn't brought it up, I wouldn't have remembered it.
Right.
And it's a seminal picture in the sense that you could see how much it influenced other filmmakers. There's a whole series of those. And one of the things that I thought was interesting when you suggested we talk about it, you had to talk about French cinema before the French New Wave, is what people tend to forget is that movements that happen, even ones that are so as overwhelming and attractive as the French New Wave, had to come out of something.
Right.
And it came out of there, out of those guys. Those guys were masters and the foundation, people, not just for the French New Wave, but for so much of the cinema that we know today.
Exactly.
And so... even
Wells,
when I'm not mentioning these guys, they are there. It's like forgetting some of the great writers who have also influenced, contemporary work or classic works. Yeah.
Right. I think Wells said that The Grand Illusion was pretty much as good of a movie as you could possibly make.
Yes.
Maybe one of the top 5 best ever, and probably one of the best movies made about war.
Mm-hmm.
And you could call it anti-war, but really that doesn't matter. It's just about soldiers, about war. I still need. There's a lot of Renoir movies I need to see. I don't know anything about his Hollywood period, which I need to check out some of those.
He did that one with Zachary Scott.
Right. Swamp Water with Walter Houston.
Yes.
And then I also haven't seen films like The River, which Scorsese talks about a lot. So there's still
I haven't seen that either.
There's still a lot of Renoir's career that I haven't checked out, which is true about almost all of these directors. The director I was looking at recently, who's one of the main figures in this period, is Marcel Carne.
Yes.
Now, I don't warm to his movies as much like Children of Paradise, and I was watching another one, Port of the Night, which, again, the sort of fantasy type thing that works its way into his movies, for some reason, just doesn't catch my attention. But the one of his I do like is Port of Shadows, which
another one.
Jean Gabin.
Right.
And then the other one I like from him is Le Jour se lève, which is again Jean Gabin, and that's the one where he's up in his room the whole time, and he's like barricaded in there, and he's like shooting, or he's got a gun, and then it's kind of flashing back and telling the story. That's another really good one. But what do you think about Carne?
I like his work. Again, with reservations like you do, there's a carnivalesque kind of quality to the work that takes you out of what he establishes into a strange world that is slightly alien to what we're used to, really. And that's really one of the reasons why I have problems with it, like that, trying to see how it works. It works for him, but it doesn't always work for my receptivity of it.
And apparently it works for some people, quite well. But I tried, like I said, I tried to warm to Children of Paradise and this other one, Port of the Night, Port de la Nuit. And the fantasy elements, whereas with Port of Shadows, that's one that doesn't have any. And I really connected with it. And you were talking about Gabin, who's in a lot of these directors' work. And you said he's the French Spencer Tracy, is what he was considered. And to me, he's one of the greatest actors.
Oh, God, yes.
So at ease in every role.
And all of his career, from being a young man to right up to, a year or so before he died, because he made so many films. And he anchored films with such authority. And one of the nice things was all the hot young actors, Delon, Belmondo, all of them wanted to work with him because they were certain by working with him they'd learn something. And
which was smart.
What was also interesting was their work actually deepened when they were in pictures with him.
That's something that, you saying that, and I might be wrong about this, but that's something that the actors in the method generation from the U.S. didn't necessarily do.
No,
someone like Dean or Brando didn't have the humility to say, I'm going to work with Spencer Tracy, or even someone like Gregory Peck or Gary Cooper. I know you don't like Gary Cooper much, but I'm just saying that acting from those old days and pick up what I can. They were more like, this is the new way, forget the old way. But I think
one of the problems was, interestingly enough, I was going to say their youth, but when I think about it, the French were also young, they're younger guys, because there was, when they got older, Brando and Newman and them, they did refer back to looking at those people's work and appreciating the work that they did. But as you said, at that point, there was a whole breakdown. Let's break down this old system. But the French New Wave did the same thing.
They did.
With
but
these
I'm just
guys.
saying that the actors
were
more respectful. And even the directors, even though they damned the current French cinema, I think they weren't. They were very clear that people like Bresson and Renoir, and that they liked those guys. So they weren't saying they weren't throwing these guys under. The director that I'm most crazy about right now is Henri-Georges Clouzot, who did Wages of Fear, Diabolique, a movie called Quai des Orfèvres. It's hard to say, right?
What does it mean?
And it basically means cops, from what I understand. It's like another word for the police. But and then the Corbeau, which is the Raven, right? And then one that I watched recently, L'assassin habite au 21, which means the murderer lives at number 21. Now those, to me, the most famous is Diabolique, and the most famous of director's career, it's probably the worst. But
and my least favorite.
But Wages of Fear you've seen, and we've seen the remake that Friedkin did, Sorcerer. I love Wages of Fear, and I love the remake.
Both of them were very good. Sorcerer was a good version.
Yes, it was a good version. But I think that Clouzot, something about his work, and he's got a large variety in his work, but those films really stand out. The ones that I like the most are those two, Quai d'Enfer and L'Assassin habite au 21, because they have elements of sort of being not screwball comedies, but kind of like Hawk's pictures, like Bringing Up Baby and His Girl Friday, but in France. With these characters, these multi-characters and heightened personalities and all these character actors coming in and out and in and out. And they're lighthearted, but they have serious elements, which is like His Girl Friday, where, it's very funny, and then all of a sudden, bam, suicide, So I think that I really have been responding to those ones lately. And I think I showed you the Quai d'Enfer one, but the L'Assassin you haven't seen.
No. But I really love Wages of Fear.
Oh, it's great.
I saw that as a kid when
Right.
it came out, and I remember like thinking, "My God!" You know,
it creates the
yes.
tension.
Yes.
And if you haven't seen Wages of Fear, both of them are about guys in South America who are driving these trucks full of nitroglycerin up these jungle mountain roads to try to put out a fire at this oil camp or whatever, oil plants. So it's just full of nerves, and it's Yves Montand that's in the, one of his best.
And another actor that we don't hear about much, but
Right.
could do it all, could sing, could dance, and the only time he stumbled his foot really was whenever he made an American movie, because his English
Which
was
I
not
haven't
very
seen
good.
any of those, but I know that they're not supposed to be very good.
No, they put him in Sanctuary, which was
The William Faulkner one,
Yeah, and then they put him in On a Clear Day You Can See Forever. But his English just wasn't good enough for that. But Clouzot's work, who's what we're talking about, is one of the foundational works if somebody's interested in looking at works that influenced the work of the French New Wave.
Yeah, I think he's a really strong director, and there's a lot of he did one. I haven't seen it, but I'm fascinated by his last film that he never completed, called L'Enfer, which is Hell.
Yeah.
And someone took the script and adapted it and did it in the '90s with that actress that's the Polanski's wife, Emmanuelle. I can't remember her last name.
Yes.
But someone recently, like 4 or 5 years ago at Cannes, took the film and made a documentary using the film, and it's supposed to be really interesting, but of course it never got released. But the reviews were like, Hoberman at Village Voice said that the documentary about it was like the best film of the year and all this stuff. So I need to spend some time to track that down.
Maybe Criterion will do something with it.
Right. A couple other guys who did more genre work that I wanted to talk about was Jean-Pierre Melville.
Oh, your God, yes.
Who, to me, may be in the top 5 directors of the crime genre because he focused on it. You know, that was his. It's like Michael Mann.
Right.
It's like, this is kind of my focus. I'm going to make movies about this, and I might deviate a little bit from it, but I'm going to mainly be on it. What are the Melville movies that you like the most?
Well, The Samurai, of course.
Right.
I have some here. What is that? Le Rouge?
Le Cercle Rouge.
The Red Circle.
Yeah.
Right. And then what's the other one that he did with Delon again? Because he worked with Delon so many times. The one with Delon is a cop.
Well, the last one is
Flic.
Yeah.
Right. I have a box set.
Yeah.
That's what I've got.
And those are his later films.
Right. But then I love Army of Shadows.
Right. Army of Shadows to me is so good. The best movie ever made about the French Resistance.
Right. Yes. Final way.
And it's just haunting. A haunting movie.
Absolutely.
What's the guy I'm blanking his name, the guy that's in that Ventura.
Yeah.
Is it Lino Ventura?
Lino Ventura, yes.
He's so damn
Former
good.
boxer, turned actor.
Yeah.
And is so solid. I would never guess he was a boxer once.
Right.
You know, but the face has great character.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, well, the minute I read that he was a boxer, of course.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course, when you get that wonderful face.
Right.
Yeah. But, Army of Shadows to me is the quintessential Jean-Pierre Melville.
Right.
And then the genre pieces, as you said, they are really solid, but I think the top of what he ever did was that.
Army of Shadows.
Yes.
And it has elements of genre, but it transcends it.
Yes.
I really like Bob Le Flambeur.
Yes.
That he did.
Oh, I was going to mention that.
Which is just great.
Well, that to me is his Tempest.
Yeah.
That is a autumnal picture.
Right.
Where he just kind of relaxes and lets the story tell itself, let the characters go wherever they're going to go.
Yeah.
And when we come out, we feel like we've lived with them, we've known them, and we've released them from ourselves.
Yeah.
That's really lovely.
And you were, I haven't seen it, but you were saying the Americans screwed it all up.
Oh, well, yeah.
Actually, I guess not Americans, because I think Neil Jordan was the director.
Yes.
But
well, what we did, like we always do, is we took the plot.
Right.
We didn't take the nuances. And how can we do that anywhere? Can you take the nuances? Yeah. And so doing it, again, if you don't have a star system, you can pick the right actors who just embody the characters fully. And that's what he did with Bob Le Flambeur, where with The Good Thief, you knew that even to raise the money, they needed a star name, etc. And, Nick Nolte is okay in the picture, but it just doesn't stand up to the original. It's simple as that.
The interesting, when we were talking about Army of Shadows, one thing that I wanted to mention to people who don't know a lot about this is that we're talking about directors from pre-New Wave, but a lot of these guys worked into the New Wave. So movies like Army of Shadows, that was made in, I think, 1968 or 7, something like that. But that's like 6-7 years into the New Wave.
But they were working from a tradition.
Right, exactly. But what I wanted to say is they weren't really, even though they kept working into it, it's not like they suddenly changed, adopted this new stuff.
Not at all.
They just stuck with what they were doing.
And they remained as rich and as influential.
Right.
Because the French New Wave guys were really new kids on the block.
Right.
So they were learning as they were going on.
Yeah.
What we liked about it was the precociousness of what they suggested and presented in their work. Yeah. But they didn't just arrive delivered. We can find all kinds of things wrong with the films of the French New Wave, the early films particularly. It's just that they broke so many traditions that it was startling.
Yeah, exactly. But again, about Melville, I think you see the influences really clearly with him and Tarantino. Movies like Le Samurai, Jim Jarmusch, clearly influenced by that. And then Michael Mann, like I said, taking a lot from Le Sacre Rouge and stuff like that. So he's someone, if people like those movies...
Yeah, he's the one I would really recommend.
Yes. Well, he's the most accessible.
Right.
And his films are the most typically entertaining, so I think it's a good place to start. The other guy that you turned me on to, I remember... We were in one of your film classes, 5-6 years ago, and you said
it seems like an eternity.
Right, it's been a while.
Yes.
But anyway, you put on a movie that I remember the rest of the class, to my recollection, was just kind of like, and I, from the beginning credits, was just like, wow. Was Joy House, which is from a director, Rene Clement.
Yes.
Right?
Oh God, yes.
And I just thought, and this was another movie with the actor Alain Delon from The Samurai. And there's 2 films that he did that you turned me on to. Right. Joy House, Purple Noon. And again, they're both genre pieces. Yes. They're both crime movies. But I was just blown away by Joy House. What do you have to say about that?
Well, what your response is, I showed it not just only in that class, but a few other classes. And that's a film that developed a cult following in the class, in the sense that, let's say I had 100 people in the class. 10 people liked it.
Would be really crazy.
And then years later, they'd forget the name, and I'd run into people. I remember one point we went looking for a phone somewhere.
Yeah.
And one of the clerk that served us was a young woman who had been in the class, and she kept wanting to remember that picture because it stayed with her so much, but she couldn't remember the title. So then I mentioned it. Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's a forgotten film of his that I think is wonderful. And it's a film that, exactly the response you said, I had the same response to, because I saw it when I was a film, not film student, but an acting student. And I went with a bunch of other actors.
Right.
And it was shown on a double bill. And they liked the film prior to that.
The American Delon film, which you thought was just
which
silly,
was nothing and nobody ever talks about anymore with Anne Margaret. And I love this, and they completely dismissed it. So that's the nature of that particular film's response.
Yeah.
The audience response to that film is that a minority love it, and then everybody else is indifferent.
Right.
But I think it's a great movie.
Yeah.
And I think it contains several great performances. I also love the script and the tone of the film.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's dark comedy, kind of. Maybe everything's kind of really
interesting black
tone.
comedy.
Yeah.
Yes.
But he made Purple Noon, which is to this day
course.
still the best.
Yes.
Well, in our opinion, the best Patricia Highsmith adaptation. Well, maybe Stranger on a Train if you're going to go with just her general work.
Yes.
But the Tom Ripley series, definitely the best.
Because it resonates various echoes that either were made explicit in the second version, Candid to Mr. Ripley, or it avoided them completely.
Right. Yeah, it's A really interesting movie. And you said that Joy House is an undersung film. He's an undersung director, period, I think, because he kind of gets lost somewhere.
Yes.
And even a movie like his Charles Bronson movie, Rider on the Range, is probably next to Hard Times, one of the best Bronson movies ever made.
Well, I remember that film as being the film that brought Bronson back to America.
Yeah.
Because he had played so many secondary roles in America, went overseas, became a big name, and there were people who really didn't understand why. Mm-hmm. And then Ride on the Rain showed up, and suddenly he was playing leads in America and right up to the end.
Right.
I mean, he came back to Hollywood, and the larger audience recognized his leading man quality, and then it happened. So that's a film that I haven't heard about in a long, long time. And again, I don't even know.
It's not released here.
Yeah,
or at
that's
least
what I was
not
going to say. I don't know any version of it. That's
when I watched it, it was like a really terrible copy that had not been remastered at all and very grainy.
Yeah, because it's moody and it needs to be remastered.
It's
really, you have to look at
someone
it
like
way.
Criterion needs to pick it up or something like that and reappreciate it. Absolutely. But yeah, so he's an interesting guy. The one I wanted to say for last, who is the most, to me, the greatest of them all, right, of this period is Robert Bresson.
Oh, right, yes.
Now, yes. I have to take a little bit of credit for turning you
absolutely.
back on to Bresson.
Well,
because
turn me on, period, because I'd seen stuff, but I had never really looked at it. Okay?
Yeah, exactly. You'd seen stuff back when they came out, right?
So, and it seemed slow to me then.
Right.
And really bizarre.
yeah, definitely. So about a year and a half ago, I think it was probably now, that I saw, I picked up, I think the first one was A Man Escaped.
Right.
And I had heard about Bresson, but didn't know really. And I sat and watched this movie and I thought, it's like when you all of a sudden your mind gets opened and you see cinema for the first time again. There's few movies that will do that where you just kind of say, oh my God, I've discovered something completely new. Because that's what it felt like. It felt like you were seeing, to me, that I was seeing cinema done right for the first time or in a new way. And his minimalism, his use of sound, I mean, the whole movie is just pretty much this guy in his jail cell during World War II. He's a French resistance fighter, and just him slowly just trying to escape, carving something, and we hear some of his voiceover, and there's barely any music in it. It's all just he uses sound with tension, and I thought this is as thrilling as a Hitchcock movie or more. And the guy's not doing any camera tricks, and he's not, he's not throwing anything in my face. So that was my first introduction, and then I gave it to you.
Yes.
And you were pretty blown away by it, too.
Well, the thing is, two things. One is the title tells you the ending.
Right.
So it's not like he's playing a suspense
but it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. And what you just said is absolutely true, because when I watched it, with what I would like to think of as more mature eyes and mind, a more mature mind anyway, I felt like you did, like I was watching the invention of cinema.
Right.
Okay? Not with any of the tricks, as you say, or any of the sophistications we've learned, but just using the primitive tools of simple storytelling, visually and orally.
Right.
This film held me because it is so, as you say, primitive. It's just close up, medium shot, wide shot, back and forth. And it tells this compelling story that holds you, and it could have held you longer than he lets the film run.
Oh, yeah.
And it's the minimalism of it is a thing, because it's not about some school of acting. It's not about some form of reportage or anything. It's just simply about human behavior.
Yeah, I saw this right before or leading up to when we were making The Men Who Robbed the Bank, our third feature, and I remember it just completely rocked everything that I was thinking about filmmaking. And when I did that, I remember talking with our sound guy, and he thought I was crazy, but I'm like, I don't want any music in this movie up until the very end. and that's something that I saw later with Pickpocket, which is another one he did a little more. It's kind of his accepted masterpiece, I think, by some, but lesser than A Man Escaped as far as I'm concerned. But what I really liked about that is, again, the minimalism of it, and waiting and waiting and waiting, and then at the end the music comes in and it's such an emotional cathartic moment. That's what I tried to create with Men Rob the Bank, and since then still he continues to influence me, and we started exploring. I was giving you more. I gave you Pickpocket to watch again, and then the one that you decided was your favorite, which I've seen. I had to watch that one. I had to watch a couple times before I appreciate it. Lancelot du Lac, which is just
that is far away my favorite.
I mean, anyone who is likes the King Arthur thing, I could see them watching this and going, "What the hell?"
Yes, yes.
Because again,
or watching any period pieces,
right?
That particularly that period, what we call the Middle Ages.
The only one you could show it to, I think, who would appreciate it, is either someone who's a cinephile, right, or a child. Mm-hmm. Because again, they're biased, right? And they would watch it and appreciate this thing.
And just take it for its
for
face
what
value.
It is. Yeah.
Yes.
But his style of the other thing that, as I started to explore his work, is his whole thing of he doesn't want actors. He doesn't like actors. He uses non-professionals. So he'll, like in a movie like Mouchette, he casts a carpenter, and I find it hilarious to watch some of the behind-the-scenes things that they have on the Criterion, because they're interviewing the carpenter, and he says, I'm a carpenter. That's hard work. That's real work. This acting thing, that's not as easy, right? I just walk on and say the lines. But his whole thing was to hire these non-professional actors, and then to pretty much have them say the words with no emotion or no inflection, really. Just say the words. Just have them just come out. They're not doing anything with their faces, trying to communicate, right? And he would just work them, take after take after take, and sort of beat them down. And the effect, to me, is incredible. And again, it's sort of against all the other tradition that's built up in film, and that's why I think it's revolutionary.
Well, where it really goes in the face of, because they did some of that, but not in that way with rigor, is the neorealist movement,
right?
Because they use non-professionals, but there was almost a stunt, a trick kind of thing with that.
He even comments on that, I think, in one interview, and he says they went half the way, because they used non-professionals but tried to make the non-professionals actors.
Yes.
And and also they would even dub their voices with actors. So he really was reaching for something else, which I think it hasn't really no one sort of picked up, whatever you call it, the baton or whatever.
It's so difficult to do. I mean, I've thought about it, and I've even tried it a little, particularly stage work with actors, but being of this tradition, it would take working with the same people like a year to get them not to perform in this way.
Well, again, you have to take people who really know nothing about the form.
And don't care.
Right.
And the other thing is that you also have to create a mise-en-scene around them that can accommodate that.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, because if anything around it is theatrical, in the sense of we understand theatrical or cinematic, then that goes against it.
Yeah.
And he creates just this simple line that makes it like biblical, practically.
Right.
Yeah.
The main thing that I like about him in his essays that I've read, his interviews, is he says that he wants to divorce film from theater.
Yeah.
And from every other form, pretty much, but mostly theater, because he says that most films are basically filmed plays to some degree or another. And I like that ambition to do that. And there's a handful of directors who have really done that or come close. Him, Bresson, Kubrick, I think, even though all of his films were based on books, he really, something like 2001 is pure cinema,
Right.
you know. And then to me, the only one that's still working of them is Herzog. I think Herzog is really, whether he would say it or not, he's really making true cinema, not cinema, not theater as cinema or anything like that. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
No, I agree with that only because, I think of myself and, my influence and my background and my foundation is theater of some kind.
Right.
And unless you lobotomize me,
right.
I can't get away from that. So that's why I'm in awe of Bresson, because when I look at what he's done, I know I could never do it because I couldn't immerse myself as deeply. When looking at his work and appreciating it the way I did, I always think of the biblical thing where, some guy went in the New Testament, went up to Christ and said, Master, how can I be saved? And he says, drop all your worldly goods and come follow me. Yeah. And I can't do it.
Right, you can't do it with
Bresson.
But that's what you want to do. Yeah,
you'd have to
do it. Yeah.
You'd have to follow him and follow him because you're going to fail until you succeed.
Well, even me, I've thought about attempting to do this because when I see what he does, it seems so true. It does seem like the gospel truth. It's funny that you say Jesus. It seems like the gospel truth of cinema. I see it. I want to follow it. But it takes me going against, I have to abandon all the actors that I work with. I have to abandon my own pride for the work that I've done. Right. I'm saying? Everything. Just say, forget it.
Also, you have to get actors or people, not actors, but people who are going to commit themselves to you in that way for the duration of whatever it's going to require.
Right.
Yeah. And that's difficult.
It is.
Next door to impossible to do.
It is.
Unless you have a lot of money and you just pay them to wait.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, on that note, is there anything else that you want to talk about?
Well, I wanted to mention one guy that...
Who did I leave out?
Well, no, you didn't leave anybody out. He probably shouldn't be involved in this, but I love him. Is Roger Vadim.
Oh, yeah, Vadim. I just don't know a lot about him.
Well, he came just before, and, everybody considers him the devil.
Right.
One, because he married almost all the leading ladies.
Such a womanizer, yeah.
Yes, but he also was, he is characterized as the quintessential male chauvinist in cinema. But he made good films, and he was a well-read. And the film that I liked of his that isn't, because he was confused frequently with the French New Wave. He came along just before them and then simultaneous with them.
It didn't work in that tradition.
No. And he constantly reminded people of that. But he made a film called The Game Is Over.
Okay.
Jane Fonda, who was married to him at the time, is in that, and it comes from a Zola novel.
Okay.
And I think it's a very fine adaptation that he did. He also did a version of La Liaison Dangereuse, which was an interesting version, and I think it's not as slick as the two American versions, but in some ways it's more honest.
Okay.
And I like that.
Huh.
And he did a few other pictures that...
his most famous is probably
And God Created Woman. And I've seen that recently, and I think it's a better picture.
Good?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, for what he wanted. And Bardot is wonderful in it. They're all wonderful. Jean-Louis Trintignant, he's one of the principals in it, and he is very good in it. And Vadim suffered from his reputation because I think a lot of people who don't like his work has never seen his work. And I think just because he immediately preceded the French New Wave, he really opened the door to the receptivity of that work.
Okay.
Because when I hit the United States, which was 15/9, the biggest film, a foreign film anyway, of that year was And God Created Woman.
Okay.
And created an appetite, one because of the sexual content, but beyond that, for what the younger French filmmakers were doing. And then right after that, Godard blasts through with Breathless. But I think we needed...
You can't discount those films.
Yeah, we needed God Created Woman almost as the John the Baptist to say, a new wave is coming.
Well, you even need movies like this. They're not the John the Baptist of them, but you need films like Amelie and stuff like that. I'm talking more modern stuff to sort of get the American public more, if Amelie gets them to watch 5 more French films, it's like, it just opens things up. But I'll have to see more of Vadim's work. I haven't explored
They're
it.
not that available
Right.
because again, that the bias against his work is such. And I'm not saying that he was, a great filmmaker. I'm just saying that he was a lot better than people give him credit for.
Right. What do you want to talk about next time?
I don't know. I'll figure it out.
Okay.
I'm at the point where I'm going moment to moment.
Right. That works. Well, did you see my quote about the all that jazz quote this morning?
No, I didn't.
I watched a great interview, a great video essay about all that jazz, and that was influential in the movie I'm doing, Durant's. To me, it was. And they had the perfect quote at the beginning of the thing. They said, "There's the past, there's the present, and there's the future, and then there's another time." The continuing, unfolding, present tense moment, or something like that. And I thought, that's all that jazz, and that's Durant's, and that's where I want to live. The continuing, unfolding, present tense moment. Yes. So anyway, we'll figure it out, and we'll be back to talking more about movies.
Good enough. Next week or something.
Later.
Okay.